My name is Lillian Brooks. I'm 31 years old, and for most of my adult life, I believe stability wasn't something you found, it was something you built. Carefully, deliberately, without leaving room for error. I work as a port logistics planner in Rotterdam. My weeks revolve around spreadsheets, shipment schedules, early calls with dock supervisors, and contingency planning when something inevitably goes wrong. It's not glamorous, but it's structured, predictable. And I like predictable. Because in my world, small inconsistencies don't stay small. They compound. They collapse. That mindset didn't just shape my career. It shaped my life, especially my relationship. My boyfriend, Adrian Keller, is 29. We've been together a little over 3 years, engaged for 6 months, no kids, just a 2-bedroom apartment, shared bills, and a wedding that, on paper, was moving forward. But in reality, it had started to feel like a slow, controlled unraveling. Adrian had a way of speaking that felt harmless in public, sharp, witty, almost charming. In private, it landed differently. He corrected people for sport. He kept score in arguments no one else realized were happening. And when we disagreed, he didn't argue. He judged. Like I was on trial, and he had already decided the verdict. The past month, something shifted, not dramatically, subtly. He became observant in a way that didn't feel like care. He would ask where I was, then dismiss the answer like it bored him. Later, he'd bring it back up as evidence, proof that I was being inconsistent. If I pushed back, he'd give me that calm, almost amused smile. "You're getting emotional again, Lillian." It wasn't suspicion. It was positioning. 2 nights before everything broke, we argued over something that should have been simple, a seating chart. His cousin didn't want to sit near my parents. Then it became about money. Then about how my family never treated him like family. I suggested we pause the wedding planning, just until we could talk like adults again. He went quiet. Not hurt, not angry. Quiet in a way that felt deliberate. Then he told me to sleep on the couch. Said he needed space. I didn't argue. Looking back, that was probably the moment he decided everything. The next morning, I was in the kitchen making coffee when Adrian walked in. Already dressed. Bag packed. Not messy, not rushed. Prepared. Like he had rehearsed the scene. "We need a break," he said, his voice steady. "I'm staying with a friend." I nodded, trying to keep things practical. "Fine, but we should talk about the lease and the deposit." That's when he stepped closer and smiled. Not warmly, not sadly, something sharper. "You won't have to worry about the deposit," he said quietly. There was a pause. Then he added, almost casually, "You'll be worrying about something else." I remember the exact moment my stomach dropped, because it didn't feel like a threat made in anger. It felt planned. 10 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. 2 police officers stood outside, Adrian behind them, arms folded, expression controlled, offended. "He grabbed me," Adrian said, "and threatened me." The words came out too clean, too precise, like they had been practiced. I tried to explain, tried to slow things down, but the officers weren't there to debate. "Turn around, ma'am." Cold metal clicked around my wrists, and Adrian leaned in just enough so only I could hear him. "Enjoy jail," he whispered. They walked me out past the neighbors. Doors opening, eyes watching, like it was a show. And Adrian stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching. Satisfied, like he had just corrected something defective. In the police car, I kept my voice steady. "Yeah, there are cameras in the hallway," I said, "and in the lobby. My phone has location history. You can verify everything." "Save it for the station," the officer replied. The driver didn't look at me, like the decision had already been made. At the station, they took my belt, my shoelaces, my phone. Everything felt procedural, detached, like I wasn't a person, just a case file moving through steps. But my mind kept looping back to one thing: timing. Adrian had been ready, packed, calm. He chose the morning when people would be leaving for work. He chose the argument the night before. This wasn't impulsive. This was structured. When they finally took the cuffs off, my wrists were lined red. I asked for my call. They handed me a phone that looked like it had been dropped 100 times. My mind ran through options. A lawyer, a friend, my manager. But then I pictured Adrian, in the apartment, going through everything, controlling the story before I even had a chance to speak. So I called my father. This is the part I never tell people, because it sounds like fiction. My father is a captain in major crimes, not the dramatic version. A real one. He doesn't do favors. And he's not sentimental. We're not close in a warm way, but he's consistent. He picked up on the second ring. "Dad," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I'm at the station. They're booking me for domestic assault. It's Adrian." Silence. Heavy. Then one question. Which station? I told him. Stay calm, he said. Do not answer questions without counsel. Then he hung up. 20 minutes later, something shifted. You could feel it. The energy in the hallway changed. People moved faster. A sergeant walked past and looked at me twice. The desk officer suddenly cared about my last name, and I realized something. Adrian probably thought my one phone call would go to him, begging, apologizing, trying to fix it. He didn't expect I would call the one person who understood exactly how this system worked. 30 minutes later, I heard my name again, but different, precise, controlled. My father walked in. Plain suit, no uniform, no raised voice. He didn't make a scene. He just looked at the desk officer and asked, "Why is my daughter sitting here in handcuffs without a formal statement taken yet?" And just like that, everything started to change. The officer behind the desk started explaining immediately, too quickly, like he needed to fill the air before my father could decide the silence was more useful. There had been a complaint. Protocol required detainment. They were in the process of booking. These things had to be taken seriously. My father listened without interrupting. That was always the unnerving thing about him. He never wasted movement, never raised his voice when precision would do more damage. Then he asked whether there was visible injury documented, whether there were independent witnesses, whether anyone had secured the hallway or lobby footage from the building Adrian himself said the incident occurred in. The answers came back vague. No footage reviewed yet. No injuries photographed. No independent witness statements taken. They were relying on his verbal account. My father nodded once, almost mildly, and said the sentence I had heard him use my entire life whenever something was being handled lazily. Procedure exists to protect both sides. He wasn't defending me emotionally. He wasn't being a father in the sentimental sense. He was doing something more effective. He was dismantling the process logically. Within minutes, a lieutenant joined us. They stepped a few feet away, not far enough for me to hear words, but close enough to read posture. My father stood upright, hands loosely behind his back. The lieutenant kept adjusting his belt and nodding too often. Then they brought me into a smaller interview room and removed the cuffs. It was a tiny difference physically, but it changed the air around me. The assumption of guilt softened into something more cautious, more administrative. The lieutenant asked me to walk through the morning from the beginning. So I did, slowly, factually. Coffee. Kitchen counter. Adrian's packed bag. His comment about deposits. The knock at the door. I mentioned the hallway cameras. I mentioned that for weeks he had been telling me in one form or another that I would regret not prioritizing him. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't try to sound wounded. I just gave them sequence and timing. After I finished, my father asked one final question. Has anyone verified whether the complainant is still at the residence? An officer left immediately. 20 minutes later, he came back looking less certain than before. Adrian wasn't there. According to neighbors, he had left in a rideshare shortly after I was taken out of the building. That mattered. If he had truly been in immediate danger, why leave calmly and disappear before even providing a full formal recorded statement in person? The lieutenant's jaw tightened at that. My father didn't look at me when he spoke again. He kept his eyes on the lieutenant. I trust this will now be handled thoroughly. For the first time since the handcuffs clicked around my wrists, the panic inside me loosened. Not because I felt safe, because I felt clear. Adrian thought this would frighten me into submission. He thought a morning in a holding cell would reset the balance between us. What he hadn't accounted for was that once you pull a lever like that, you don't get to control everything it moves. About an hour later, the lieutenant returned with an entirely different tone. They were releasing me pending further review. No charges filed at that time. No formal arrest record beyond the initial intake. Careful language. Deliberately careful. I signed the paperwork. They returned my belt and shoelaces. My phone came back in a clear evidence bag that crackled when I touched it. When I stepped into the hallway, my father was waiting by the exit. He didn't hug me. He didn't ask if I was all right. He asked, "Is there any part of his claim that could be misinterpreted?" "No," I said. "I never touched him." He held my gaze for the second, measuring. Then he nodded once. "Good, because this is no longer a relationship problem. It's a credibility problem." Outside the station, the late afternoon air felt strange against my skin, like I had been gone longer than a few hours. My father finally explained what had shifted things. An officer had reached Adrian by phone and asked him to come in to finalize his statement. He said he was too shaken and needed more time. That by itself wasn't unusual. What was unusual was that he had already sent two mutual friends a detailed version of events, complete with exact phrasing about me grabbing his wrist and threatening him. The level of detail in those messages didn't match someone too distressed to give a proper statement. The building manager had also been contacted. Hallway footage showed Adrian standing calmly outside the apartment before the police arrived. No visible panic, no attempt to leave in distress. At one point, according to my father, he adjusted his hair in the reflective elevator door. That detail lodged itself in my mind in a way I hated, because it was so small, so ordinary. And that was exactly what made it horrifying. He hadn't been afraid. He had been composed. My father added one more thing before dropping me off near the building. False allegations are rare, he said, but when they happen, they escalate if they aren't confronted immediately. If he realizes this didn't destroy you, he may try again more carefully. I asked whether his involvement would cause problems. He said he hadn't interfered. He had asked procedural questions. That was allowed. He also said, in the same steady tone he used for everything difficult, that if the evidence had supported Adrian's claim, he would not have protected me. I believed him. That's who he is. Before he left, he gave me one instruction. Do not go inside alone. Bring a neutral witness. Document everything. I called the building manager first. Adrian wasn't on the lease. I was the sole tenant. That mattered more than I would have understood a day earlier. Then I called my cousin Naomi, who lived 15 minutes away and worked freelance from home. She didn't ask for explanations first. She just said she was coming. By the time I reached the building again, I could see our balcony doors slightly open from the street, and a cold, clean feeling passed through me. Not fear exactly. Recognition. Adrian hadn't expected me back so quickly. Naomi arrived before I went up. I explained the situation in the most factual language I could manage. She knew what my father did, and she understood immediately why facts mattered more than outrage. The apartment door was unlocked. That told me everything. We went in together, and I started recording on my phone. Not secretly, not dramatically, just narrating the date and time out loud. The living room looked mostly intact, but wrong in subtle ways. The framed photo from our engagement dinner was gone from the shelf. His shoes by the entrance were gone. 2 watches from the drawer near the hallway mirror were missing. In the bedroom, half his clothes were gone, not packed carefully, just cleared. My laptop bag was open on the bed, but the laptop was still there. The drawer where I kept my passport had been pulled out and shoved back in, crooked. He hadn't left in panic. He had curated what he took. On the kitchen counter, there was a printed screenshot of what looked like a draft social media post. It wasn't addressed to anyone yet. It said something about surviving emotional abuse and finally finding the courage to involve the police. Several phrases had been highlighted in yellow. Naomi stared at it, then looked at me. He's building a narrative. I didn't answer because my phone buzzed in my hand at that exact moment. A text from Adrian. Not a call. Just a message. You should start thinking about how this will look at work. Then another line. Arrests have a way of following people. And then the clearest sentence of all. If you apologize publicly and admit you scared me, maybe I'll consider telling the police I overreacted. I read it once. Then again. And something inside me went still. There it was. Not fear. Not heartbreak. Leverage. He wasn't acting traumatized. He was bargaining. I took screenshots immediately and forwarded them to my father and to a lawyer Naomi recommended. Then I emailed the building manager requesting immediate authorization to change the locks, citing the fact that the lease was solely in my name and there had been a domestic disturbance allegation. The reply came within 15 minutes. Approved due to safety concerns. While we waited for the locksmith, Adrian sent another message, this one less polished, more irritated. He said I had embarrassed him by questioning the wedding. Said I needed to learn there were consequences for that. I didn't respond. I blocked his number. Then I blocked him everywhere else I could think of. Messaging apps, social platforms, personal email. Anything from him would either bounce or disappear into a filter. If he wanted communication, he could do it through legal channels. That decision felt cleaner than any argument ever could. The locksmith arrived just before sunset. I showed him my ID and a digital copy of the lease. Naomi stood in the hallway as a witness while he replaced the cylinder. I thought I would feel devastated hearing the old lock come out. Instead, I felt calm. Not peaceful, but exact. If someone is willing to weaponize the police to win an argument, you do not negotiate with them. You remove access. By the time the new keys were in my hand, Adrian was blocked on everything. He just didn't know yet that the door he intended to use whenever it suited him no longer belonged to him. The first quiet hour after that was almost unsettling. No more buzzing. No more calculated text disguised as wounded outrage. Just the metallic click of the new lock and the low sound of Naomi opening kitchen cabinets to help me check what was missing. We made a simple inventory and photographed every room. I emailed everything to myself and to the lawyer so the timestamps were preserved. Then I wrote a short summary of the day while the sequence was still fresh. No emotion, just facts. Around early evening, my father called. Adrian had finally agreed to formalize his statement. According to my father, his version had already shifted. Now he claimed I grabbed his arm near the bedroom door, not in the kitchen. A small detail maybe, but not small enough. Inconsistency is rarely accidental when someone has rehearsed. My father added something else. During the statement, Adrian had claimed I often threatened him with my father's position. That was completely fabricated. I had never used my father's job in an argument. If anything, I avoided mentioning it because I hated what people assumed it meant. That addition, my father said, raised eyebrows. It suggested anticipation. If Adrian felt the need to paint me as someone who weaponized authority, then he already expected scrutiny. The hallway footage had now been reviewed. No visible distress when the officers arrived. No visible marks on his arms in the elevator reflection. Nothing definitive, but enough to weaken urgency. By late evening, I received a formal notice by email stating that the complaint was under review and that no charges were being filed at that time due to insufficient corroboration. Under review. Not dismissed. Not erased. That distinction mattered. About an hour later, Naomi's phone lit up. Adrian had messaged her because he could no longer reach me. He claimed I was unstable and that he feared for his safety because I had changed the locks. That pivot was almost immediate. Punishment hadn't worked, so now he was widening the victim narrative. I asked Naomi not to answer. Instead, she forwarded everything to me and to the lawyer. Then I did something that would probably seem cold to anyone who hadn't lived through that day. I called my employer. I asked HR and my direct supervisor to get on the same call. I told them that a false domestic allegation had been made, that no charges had been filed, and that I wanted the matter documented in case anyone attempted to contact the company with a misleading version first. I refused to let Adrian control the first story my workplace heard about me, because by then I understood something I wish I had seen months earlier. This was never just about anger, it was about authorship. He wanted to decide who I was before I had the chance to speak. What I didn't realize yet was how much further he was willing to go once he understood silence wasn't going to break me. The next morning, Adrian escalated exactly the way my father predicted. Not directly. Strategically. He sent a long email to my mother. I didn't find out because he told me. I found out because my mother forwarded it to me without commentary, which, if you know her, is how she signals something is serious without dramatizing it. The message was polished. That was the first thing I noticed. It wasn't emotional in a messy way. It was structured, calm, carefully worded to sound reasonable. He described months of subtle intimidation, implied I had a temper I kept hidden from others, and framed the arrest as something he had been forced to do for his own safety. He mentioned the arrest multiple times, carefully avoiding the fact that no charges had been filed. That omission wasn't accidental. It was the entire point. He wasn't trying to prove something happened. He was trying to make the label stick. I didn't reply to him. I replied to my mother. I sent her the timeline I had written the night before, the official notice from the station, the screenshots of his messages offering to consider telling the police he overreacted if I publicly apologized. No emotion, no commentary, just documentation. About 20 minutes later, she called me. She didn't ask if I was okay. She said one sentence. This is not normal behavior. That was enough. By midday, the lawyer Naomi recommended called me back. He had reviewed everything I sent, messages, timestamps, the sequence of events. He spoke in the same tone my father used. Not emotional, not sympathetic. Analytical. The message where he offers to retract his statement in exchange for a public apology, he said. That's significant. I didn't interrupt. It suggests potential malicious intent, he continued. Not something you act on immediately, but something you document carefully. He advised me not to contact Adrian under any circumstances, not to threaten anything, not to respond, even if it felt justified. Then he suggested something I hadn't considered. File a report regarding the coercive messages, not as retaliation, as record. That word again, record. That afternoon, I went back to the station voluntarily and provided the screenshots. I kept my tone consistent, factual, controlled. I explained that I had blocked him and did not intend further contact. The officer documenting it was noticeably more careful with his wording than the day before. While I was there, I learned something that settled any remaining doubt I had. Adrian had called earlier that morning, not to ask about his safety, to ask whether I had been formally charged yet. That was the moment the last piece clicked into place. He wasn't afraid of me. He was waiting for confirmation that the damage had landed. When I got home, there was a small padded envelope in my mailbox. No return address. I opened it inside, standing in the kitchen where everything had started less than 48 hours earlier. Inside was my engagement ring. No note, no message, just the ring. If I hadn't spent the last 2 days watching his patterns, it might have felt dramatic, symbolic, final. But it wasn't. This wasn't closure. This was positioning. If he returned the ring first, he could later say he ended things because he felt unsafe, that he walked away. It wasn't about emotion. It was about sequence. I placed the ring in a drawer and took a photo of it with a timestamp. Then I closed the drawer. 2 days passed without direct contact. That didn't mean he was inactive. It meant he was working through other channels. That evening, a mutual friend called me. He sounded uncomfortable before he even said anything. Adrian had hosted a small gathering at another friend's apartment. Nothing formal, just drinks, a handful of people who knew both of us. He didn't mention me immediately. According to my friend, he told the story gradually. How he had barely gotten out of a bad situation. How things had been getting worse for a while. How he finally had to involve the police. He let people connect the dots. By the end of the night, he was saying it openly. That I had been arrested for assault. My friend paused, then added, "He didn't mention charges." Of course he didn't. Selective truth is always more effective than an obvious lie. I thanked him for telling me. Then I asked one question. Did he say anything about evidence? No, he said, just the arrest. That was enough. I didn't ask him to defend me. I didn't explain my side. I simply told him I appreciated the call. Then I hung up and emailed my lawyer summarizing everything he had told me. Time, date, names, nothing exaggerated. Then I drafted a short message and sent it to a small group of close friends. I kept it neutral. An allegation has been made. No charges were filed due to lack of corroboration. I won't be discussing it further. I attached the official notice. No insults. No counter-accusations. Just facts. Control the narrative with documentation, not emotion. Later that night, my father called again. The complaint had been marked as closed, pending no further evidence. Not proven false. Not pursued. Closed. That distinction mattered legally. It meant there was no active case. It also meant the allegations still existed on paper. My father added something else. During a follow-up call with the station, Adrian had asked whether filing a complaint automatically guaranteed a restraining order. I didn't respond right away, because that question told me more than anything else he had done. That wasn't someone reacting to fear. That was someone exploring leverage. At that point, I made a series of decisions quickly. I informed the landlord in writing that Adrian would not be returning and that only I was authorized to access the unit. I removed his name from any shared utilities. I changed every password connected to anything we had shared. Streaming services, cloud storage, internet accounts. Clean separation, no loose ends. The strangest part was how little I felt. Not numb, not detached, just precise. I wasn't grieving the relationship yet. I was correcting an error. I had mistaken control for stability. And now I was recalibrating. But there was one last thread that couldn't be cut cleanly. The wedding venue. The contract was under both our names, and the deposit had come from my account. Which meant, whether I liked it or not, there was one final point where our lives were still connected. And knowing Adrian, he wasn't going to let that go quietly. The next morning, I emailed the venue coordinator before Adrian had the chance to shape that narrative too. I kept it simple. The wedding was canceled due to a personal matter. I asked what documentation they needed to release me from liability and whether the deposit was refundable or transferable. No emotion, no explanation, just process. Within an hour, Adrian inserted himself exactly where I expected. He emailed the coordinator as well, CCing me. His version was different. He said the event was being postponed due to emotional distress caused by me. He asked them not to cancel anything yet and mentioned there might be legal proceedings. There it was again. Not grief, not confusion. Positioning. The coordinator replied to both of us, requesting a joint written confirmation to cancel or a legal order. Predictable and inconvenient. Instead of replying to Adrian, I forwarded the entire thread to my lawyer. He responded within the hour with something far more effective than anything I could have written emotionally. A formal notice. Short. Precise. The engagement was terminated. I was withdrawing consent for the event. He requested written confirmation of cancellation and clarification on deposit allocation. No accusations. No escalation. Just structure. That same afternoon, Adrian emailed me from a new address. Of course he did. I had blocked every other path. His tone had shifted again. Now it was sharper, more direct. He accused me of trying to financially sabotage him, said I was acting irrationally, said if I canceled the venue without his agreement, he would tell people the truth about what happened. I read it once, then forwarded it. No reply. By early evening, the venue responded. Without mutual consent, they would retain the deposit and release the date. A clean outcome. Financially painful, but clean. I didn't hesitate. I authorized the forfeiture of my portion. It wasn't a small amount, but it was finite, contained. Predictable loss is always preferable to open-ended leverage. About an hour later, Adrian sent another email. Shorter this time, less composed. "You're overreacting," he wrote. "You're ruining both our reputations." I stared at that sentence longer than I expected to. Not because it hurt, because it clarified everything. Not safety. Not fear. Reputation. That had always been the center of it. The arrest wasn't about protection. It was about narrative dominance. If he could label me first, publicly, convincingly, then everything that came after would be filtered through that version. But he miscalculated two things. 1, I document everything. 2, I do not negotiate under threat. By the end of that night, the venue date was released. The deposit was gone. The engagement was over, not emotionally, but structurally. There were no shared obligations left, no contracts tying us together, no logistical reasons to speak. For the first time since the handcuffs closed around my wrists, there were no open threads left for him to pull, which meant one thing. If Adrian was going to make another move, it wouldn't be subtle. It came 3 days later, a formal letter, delivered by courier, from a lawyer representing Adrian. I read it standing in my living room, the same place where he had stood days earlier, arms folded, watching the police take me away. The letter alleged emotional abuse, claimed I had forced him out of the apartment by changing the locks, demanded financial compensation for relocation expenses, half of the wedding deposit, and then, carefully worded at the end, a suggestion. If I did not cooperate, they would consider pursuing civil action and seeking a protective order. I read it twice. Then I sat down. Not because I felt overwhelmed, because I wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything. Timing, language, structure. It was all consistent with everything he had done so far. Escalate, reframe, apply pressure. I didn't respond. I forwarded it to my lawyer. Then I went to work. By the afternoon, my lawyer had responded formally. Attached were the documents that mattered. The lease showing I was the sole tenant. The messages where Adrian offered to retract his police statement in exchange for a public apology. The official notice confirming no charges were filed due to lack of corroboration. And then one sentence. Clear. Controlled. Any further defamatory statements would result in counterclaims. No threats. Just consequence. 2 days later, Adrian's lawyer replied. The tone had changed. Noticeably. They said their client wished to resolve the matter privately. Withdraw previous demands. That was the closest thing to a retreat I was going to get. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just softening. Which told me everything I needed to know. They had reviewed the documentation and understood what would happen if this continued. That same week, Adrian's online post disappeared. No explanation, no correction. Just gone. Silence again. But this time, different, less controlled, more empty. And I realized something as I stood in my apartment, keys in my hand, the new lock catching the light every time I moved. This had never been about whether he could prove something happened. It was about whether I would break under the weight of accusation. And when I didn't, the entire structure he built started to collapse under its own contradictions. There was only one part left now. Not legal, not logistical, just the aftermath. 3 days after the venue was canceled, everything went quiet. Not peaceful quiet, strategic quiet. The kind that feels like someone is deciding whether to escalate or retreat. Then, at 9:12 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a notification from a colleague. A link. No message attached. I opened it. A long post. Public. Carefully written. Adrian didn't use my name, but he didn't need to. Anyone who knew about the canceled wedding could connect the details. He wrote about walking away from a controlling partner, about finding the courage to speak up, about systems that fail victims unless you fight hard enough. It was polished, measured, emotionally persuasive, and deliberately vague in all the places that mattered. If you didn't know me, you would believe him. That was the point. I read it once, then closed it. No immediate reaction. No message to friends. No post in response. Because by then, I understood something clearly. He wasn't trying to convince me. He was trying to establish a version of reality before I could challenge it. At the exact same time that post went live, the letter from his lawyer arrived. The timing wasn't coincidence. It was coordination. Public pressure paired with legal pressure. Different fronts. Same objective. Control the narrative. I forwarded both to my lawyer. Then I made coffee, sat down at my kitchen counter, and waited, not passively, precisely. By early afternoon, my lawyer had responded to his. The reply was structured, almost clinical. Attached were the documents again. Lease agreement, sole tenant. Screenshots. His messages offering to retract statements in exchange for public apology. Official notice, no charges filed due to lack of corroboration. Timeline, consistent, documented, time-stamped. Then one final paragraph. Any continued defamatory statements would result in formal legal action. No emotion, no argument. Just evidence and consequence. I didn't need to say anything publicly, because everything that needed to be said was already documented. 2 days later, the shift happened. His lawyer replied again. Short, reserved. Their client wished to withdraw all previous demands. They were no longer pursuing the matter. No mention of compensation. No mention of legal action. Just withdrawal. I read the email twice, then closed it. An hour later, the post disappeared. No edit. No clarification. Gone. If you searched for it, nothing came up. No explanation to the people who had read it. No correction to the story he told. Just absence. That was the closest thing to accountability I was ever going to get. Silence. The kind that follows when a narrative collapses, but no one wants to admit it existed. Weeks passed. Then months. No new messages. No indirect contact through friends. No legal follow-ups. Nothing. The complaint remained on record as reviewed and closed without charges. It didn't vanish completely. It never would. I understood that. Some things don't disappear. They just stop moving. About 4 months later, I found the ring again while reorganizing a drawer. It was exactly where I had left it. Cold. Unchanged. For a moment, I held it in my hand, turning it slightly so the light caught the surface. I tried to remember what I had felt when I first wore it. Excitement, certainty, stability. And then I realized something uncomfortable. None of those things had actually come from him. They had come from my belief in structure, in planning, in the idea that if you build something carefully enough, it won't collapse. I placed the ring back in the drawer and closed it, not as a symbol, just as an object, something that used to represent a future that no longer existed. What I lost was measurable, a deposit, an engagement, time. What I almost lost was less tangible, credibility. And once I understood that was the real target, everything else made sense. Adrian didn't try to hurt me physically. He tried to define me, publicly, permanently. And when that failed, there was nothing left for him to hold on to. If there's anything I learned from all of this, it's simple. When someone is willing to weaponize systems to win an argument, the relationship is already over. The only question is how cleanly you leave. I didn't win, not in the way people think about it. There was no apology, no acknowledgement, no moment where everything balanced out. There was just resolution, structured, documented, final. And sometimes that's the only kind of ending that actually holds. If you ever find yourself in something like this, don't argue under pressure. Don't try to out-explain someone who is rewriting the story in real time. Document everything. Control what you can. And when the moment comes, close the door. Change the lock. Keep the record. Because silence, when it comes after truth is established, isn't defeat. It's the absence of anything left to manipulate.